elements that we feel are important at a high level. We do have a chapter that you can read as well. And then we're going to also engage you in some inquiry and reflection and some of the questions we've even asked ourselves for helping us to think about the rationale and how do we embrace spirituality in ourselves and how do we bring that forward ethically in our practice.
So to understand spirituality, I'm going to start with the etymology. The word spirituality comes from the Latin word spiritus, meaning I breathe. Breath carries the vital force of life. With each inhalation and exhalation of breath, the body is enlivened with spirit. According to Master Sen, spirit also derives from the Latin word spiro. The conceptualization brings together the eco and spiritual aspects. Thus, an eco-biopsychosocial spiritual approach recognizes the spiritual connections have with the universe. This whole physical universe we see is made from a spiral movement. From the growing fetus of the baby, from the sprouting seed to the flower, from the expanding nebula to the galaxy, all bodies, plant, animal, human, expand in vortices and whirlpools. We inhale in a vortex and exhale in a vortex. Wind and water move in spiral formations. Ancient and indigenous cultures understand that all life is spirit. The breath enters and expels from the body in a spiral formation, and all life grows through the momentum created through spirals or vortices. It's that circular motion that gives the force to allow growth and expansion to occur.
So this looks very similar to the slide you saw earlier. And I have done a deep dive across professions to try to understand what is religion, what is spirituality, where do they overlap. Somebody asked a question earlier today too about culture. And when we think of, and I'm going to talk about that just briefly on the next slide, but what we can sort of glean from the literature, and it comes from studies of asking people around the world, what do they think spirituality is? What do they think religion is? And there hasn't been one definition of spirituality because it's so unique to each person. So there needs to be a broad conceptualization of it. Religion, of course, is more institutionalized beliefs shared by a community, and traditions, things like dogma, are involved with that. Spirituality, on the other hand, is this search for connection to oneself, to others, to nature, to a higher power of one's belief. And it's also that searching for meaning. Who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's the meaning? In trauma, it's often, why is this happening to me? Or why did God let this happen to me? This is what a lot of children ask me. And it's our drive, and what's my purpose? Why am I here? Am I here I want to serve. How can I serve? And then it also is about values and morals, and it's about creativity and passion and joy. And I often talk about, I play hockey and I play volleyball, and I think those are spiritual pursuits because when I'm playing those sports, nothing else exists. It's just me and my team and the ball or the puck, and I feel in the flow of things. So people feel that in art and in music, things like that, right? Dance. And then there's these sort of dimensions. So there's the intrapersonal, so within ourselves, how do we connect within ourselves? And then the interpersonal, how do I connect with others and the things in my environment? And then there's the transpersonal, which is beyond, right? So it's like Maslow talked about perfect spirits, flow, things like that. How do I connect on a higher level? So there's these sort of dimensions that are associated with it. And then someone mentioned culture, and I wanted to just point this out. And it's interesting because when I teach spirituality, when I've taught the courses or talk about it in class, I often have students, especially international students, that talk about how spirituality is just every day. And it was interesting because I kind of understood that. I had the opportunity, though, to go to Africa last summer, and I got a whole new perspective on what spirituality every day actually means and how it is part of every day there. And so if you look at this diagram of culture, you do see faith and religion there, but spirituality is part of our food choices. We make decisions based on our spirituality about what type of food we eat. It's about our art, it's our attitudes, our beliefs. So spirituality is so embedded and intersected with culture. I don't think that we can actually separate those things. And they are part of how people live every day. The other thing that's important here is that the reason we need to attend to spirituality is also because it's really in accreditation standards, right? So I know when I actually left my position as a therapist, we were being told to ask about spirituality in an assessment. When someone came in, we were to ask them about spirituality. Is spirituality important to you? And so I did some research with children and parents and clinicians, and what I found was clinicians were saying things like, so I ask about spirituality and they say, yeah, it's important, then what? What do I do with that? I have no idea. So we need to have models and practices for people to be able to follow through with those things, and if they're going to be asking those. And it's in health organization accreditation standards. It's in many accreditation standards also for education. So in fact, it's in the social work, the new EPAS, the standards, it talks about spirituality there. Is this me? Okay. So we started to look at things like what's missing. What have we been really thinking about what's missing in terms of spirituality and social work? And so non-Western worldviews and ways of knowing and being and doing that are really spiritually rooted have been missing. If we're thinking about a strength-based approach, which we talk about all the time, if we're not including spiritual strengths, resources, communities, practices, and activities, then we're missing a huge opportunity to support people. We also want to know, is spirituality a source of distress? Has it been oppressed? Has there been spiritual abuse? So we need to think about it from that lens. From a trauma-informed lens, as I said, in my experience, spirituality tends to be at the root of what's going on for people. And being trained in things like cognitive behavioral therapy, thought stopping is not going to heal someone's heart or the root of their spiritual pain, which could be really deep and existential. And then also, it's, as Lisa was talking about, it's part of post-traumatic growth, right? And it's part of how we can be resilient and how we can think about things. And often when people go through a trauma, they have deeper understandings of what's happened to other people, right? And they have more empathy and compassion. They might take up a cause. Mothers Against Driving came from trauma, right? They might engage in new pursuits. During COVID, what did people do? You couldn't get a guitar anywhere because people were playing guitar because that was a new pursuit they were taking up. And then there's this spiritual growth, this existential and spiritual growth. And so we need to really think about that in this eco-biopsychosocial spiritual model and looking at these pieces and how do they fit appropriately into a model of care. So part of our pedagogy and practice model, we start to look at how can we have something that is open, that will embrace different approaches, that will embrace Eastern, Indigenous, Western practice approaches and bring those together. How can we get people to start to use reflective practice so that we are not proselytizing, so we are not oppressing people, that we are coming together where we have connection spiritually, to engage in where might my spiritual worldview impact my practice? When might I have biases or judgments based on my spiritual worldview? We also want to include experiential learning because we know didactic teaching is not necessarily the way to engage spirituality. You need to have creative, expressive things and contemplative practices, meditative types of things. We also know that contemplative practices and those things are trauma-informed. Someone can't learn if they're not regulated. So to start a class, it's important to have some type of a grounding or experiential, meditative, mindfulness, contemplative practice. And we know that those are part of many faiths, traditions, and religions. And so if we can start that way, then the brain's going to learn better. And then we also started to look at spiritual intelligence. So this is now emerging. Zohar and Marshall in the business world talked about in spiritual intelligence at the beginning of this century, or the 2000s. And they started to say that they felt spiritual intelligence, so having an awareness of spirituality and evolving yourself spiritually, developing spiritually, is even higher than emotional intelligence. And so we want to help facilitate that with students who are going to go out and work in the field. They need to have some spiritual intelligence. They have to recognize that spirituality might be something that they're going to encounter and practice.
So this is our spiritual practice model that we wanted to show you. And you see that we have 3 components to it. And we can share this model with you in some way. It offers students a model of practice for developing knowledge, skills, and attitudes to integrate spirituality, as Heather was talking about. And faculty and field supervisors can adopt this framework alongside students as well. So we're presenting a spiritually oriented and healing-centered model for education and practice. This model is based on both of our research and work over the past 2 decades. So just a brief discussion about each of the components of the model. So the outer circle, starting from, highlights the critical theoretical assumptions and aspects of practice that underpin our approach. And this can work across helping professions, not just social work. It can be adopted into education, social work, law, architecture,
nursing. Engineering.
And the middle circle is the portion that incorporates the theories that we are going to introduce you to. And they also link to practice as well, as identifying some of the skills and knowledge and attitudes. We are inviting those learners to engage and to develop their spiritually sensitive practice. The 8 sectors offer guiding processes and tools that support development, so someone knows what to say after, yes, spirituality is important. They know then what to do. And then we have the inner section, which speaks to one's identity development. So at the heart of spirituality is the assumption that all individuals are spirit. We called it oneness, the center heart. And so, And this oneness with spirit integrates how a person makes sense of their existence and mortality according to their own worldview as well. It means that each of us are diverse aspects of spirit living on earth. We interconnect with all that exists both on and beyond our world. This heart permeates throughout all the other areas in our model, and it embodies the spiritual essence and core of our personal and our professional selves, whatever field each of us are in. Beneath our diversity is our shared humanity on earth, the foundation of self and other compassion, is known as karuna in Sanskrit. It is recognizing that unity. It's also related to the concept of Ubuntu, and which was adopted by the International Federation of Social Workers as a theme for the next decade. And Mayaka and Truel highlight that Ubuntu is an authentic individual human being, is part of a larger and more significant relational, communal, environmental, and spiritual world. So this is really central to our work. And we know that many ancient traditions and philosophies speak to this unity and this oneness, this interconnectedness of life.
Sometimes I have students, shared this model, and they say, well, what if I'm not spiritual? We want it open enough that you can think about it as however you frame that for yourself, right? Is it your inner core? Is it your higher self? Is it the world that you live in? So it's open to be able to have your own worldview sort of applied to it. Is that it for that slide? Yeah. Okay. So there are a number of theories that we talk about that are supportive of spirituality. So when we look at things like humanistic and existential theory, which really speak to our human needs and our spiritual development, how we move, from sort of thinking about when we're young, we need, our basic needs need to be met, and, in times of trauma, our needs need to be met as well. If we're thinking from a trauma model of healing, when someone is in a place where they're needing safety and security, that's not a time to start talking about, deep spiritual things. We need to have stability there. Once we can move to, stability, then we can move up to start looking at, what's impacted me in terms of my well-being, what's my self-esteem like, what's my identity like now. That work needs to be done. And then we can start to really support that transcendence, or that movement upwards to thinking about, from a spiritual sense, my connectedness to everything else, right? And so that's a really supportive model in our approach. Transpersonal theory and integral theory also are really important, looking at how mind, body, and spirit come together and create wellness and wholeness. And if we have wounds in either of those circles, we're going to be a little wobbly. And oftentimes throughout our lives, we're a little wobbly, right? Like I always say we never have a perfect circle of wellness. We always have some wobbles going on. And then this notion of spiritual intelligence, which has really emerged, that I mentioned about Zohar and Marshall, and I'm just going to move us to the next slide because I want to talk a bit more about that. So there's a book by Cindy Wigglesworth called SQ21. And I really love Wigglesworth's model. She talks about these, how the first step is really about thinking about our own spirituality, coming to understand it, conceptualizing it, and then having a greater awareness of our spirituality. And so she has these 4 quadrants, which encompass 21 skills or 21 areas of spiritual development that build upon one another. And so in the courses that we teach, we always go first to the self-awareness and understanding where did your spirituality develop? What influenced it? questions like that. And then we move to universal awareness, which it includes knowing more about the world and being aware of that interconnectedness of life, understanding different worldviews. And then we move to self-mastery, which is our ability to really deeply understand who we are, commit to our own spiritual growth and development, staying centered and grounded, and living in alignment with our purpose and values, and really thinking, what is that? And so you often see people in, say, midlife, changing careers because the career they're in is not aligning with their values and purpose. And I think they're moving up spiritually in that section. And then the last one is spiritual mastery and spiritual presence. And of course, this is our ability to be grounded, to be wise. This is elders, leaders, I think of Mother Teresa and the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and people like that are living every day in that quadrant. And so if we can start to plant seeds to grow into trees of social mastery and social presence, then we are growing people to be spiritual influencers in the world.
So we invite you now to have a contemplative pause. And this comes from our spiritual pedagogy chapter, where we have contemplative pauses throughout the work to have us self-reflect on making meaning and applying the theory and the concepts that we're talking about. So one of the first pedagogical considerations is for individuals to engage in reflective practice on their own spiritual development, their own challenges and worldview. And they also need to consider, what are their spiritual strengths? What are your spiritual distresses? And what are the important rituals and practices that contribute to your understanding of who you are and the interconnected relationship that all of that goes into, that is around you, to others, to the earth, the universe. This reflective process can reveal both positive and negative experiences, as well as unearth assumptions, judgments, and biases. These understandings, however, also are really important to reduce the risk of countertransference. And any of you not in the clinical world of counseling practice, countertransference is when we unconsciously, as helpers, put our unresolved conflicts onto the person we're trying to help, and it comes into the relational work and becomes very messy. We'll just put it that way, because we're unconscious about it and we don't know what's emotionally happening. So all of this really helps to keep us aware and conscious of our relational presence and being with the other or others. This reflective process can also create distress, as we said, so it's important to be nourishing and self-compassionate in the process. It also, for many, is extremely healing because we open up that space that was very silenced and oppressed in our hearts, in our families, in our communities. So understanding the various worldviews of others is also very helpful. So it is with this understanding that we ask you just to glance through these questions and consider them. And it's just a contemplative pause for now, but you can always return to it. What has your spirituality been developed within you? What are your beliefs about life, about death? How might your own spirituality play an implicit or explicit role in your work? What holds meaning for you? And how do your spiritual beliefs play a supportive role in your life, in every relationship you live in? How might they conflict with other worldviews and beliefs, and how can you turn them into a strength? Whether there is dissonance, how can you create resonance and something new out of that?
Go quick on this.
So,
can we get a copy of the slides?
sure.
That would be great.
Yes. So how to prepare for spirituality and practice. We're going to just give you some highlights of our model now. And so after theories, spiritual attunement and competencies. So we talk about spiritual listening and spiritual responsiveness. This is about being the listening. Listening is not just something that we do, it's something we become and something we are. We talk about a presence and a use of ourselves in counseling and in helping relationships. So how can we really listen from our beingness, from our spirit? And that is what attunement really refers to. There's lots of theory that talks about attunement between newborn and baby and caregiver, and that grows into all our relationships. So how do we bring that attunement into every relationship that we have? How can we be responsive in that way? We're talking about what we foster as nurturers with children, and bringing that intuitive capacity into our relationship as self, because we also remain newborns and children of spirit throughout our lives. So how can we embrace what spirit gives us and be that for others?
Another thing that we feel is really important for helpers is that they, in social work we talk about self-care, and students always are like, can we stop talking about self-care already? But we see self-care differently. We see it as a way of being, spiritual self-care. What is going to nourish me? What is going to bring meaning and purpose into my work? And when we really think about spiritually focused self-care, what are the things that we're doing every day? How are we living our life? What are the things that fill our cup every single day? A lot of times, well, I can speak for myself, when I first started in the field, I would wait till Friday or Saturday to do my self-care. That led to quick burnout. What I then learned is that, no, I need to do self-care in the morning, in between clients, at lunch, after work, and I have to make sure that, so what I started to do is I used Google Calendar and I color-coded everything. And so if I don't have a rainbow in my week, then I know that I'm not engaged in a good way of being. And so really having some reflection on that, discerning what's important, and we feel this is an ethical practice. So these are some questions here too. Again, another little bit of a contemplative pause for you to think about. How can I have spiritual self-care as a way of being? What do I want to connect more with? What brings me deep meaning? What increases my empathy and compassion? How do I want to live my spiritual life? What might bring me deeper connection in my day and in my work and in my relationships? Which practice do I need today to nourish me? And which practices should I maybe try more of? And maybe I should experiment with some new ones that I haven't tried. And then really taking stock of what are my spiritual strengths? What do I have? And then these questions can also be used with the people we work with to help support their own spirituality and have a spiritual way of being.
So in that vein of self-care, we want to just introduce you to a mantra meditation, Mahavakya meditation. We talked about the oneness heart, and one of the Mahavakyas of 4 is, in Sanskrit, it's Tattavam Ashi. And the purpose is to realize our unity with everything around us, and to realize circumstance is only a reflection of thought, which is the mirror of existence. Elder McIntosh talked a lot about reflection this morning and looking in the mirror, in the windows of our soul, our eyes, and seeing what we see. And so Tattvamasi is a proclamation that means we are all one. Tat means that, Tavam means thou, and Ashi means art. So Tattvamasi, that thou art. And it's a practice that we cultivate to recognize our unity. Another way to say it is everything is consciousness, everything is one. That is consciousness, that is consciousness, you are consciousness. I am consciousness, you are consciousness. Everything is that spirit. So we're going to do a meditation together right now. And I'm just going to invite you to repeat the Sanskrit. We're going to do it in Sanskrit together, and I'm going to play Master Sen doing the meditation. We can go along with him. But just a few times, say it with me. Tat, Tavam, Ashi.
Ashi.
Tat, Tavam, Ashi. Tat, Avam, Ashi.
Tattavam Ashi.
Tat, Avam, Ashi.
Tattavam Ashi.
Beautiful. That thou art. Everything is one. I'm just going to move. Okay. So that's come on. So sorry. I'm having a little problem with this thing in my way here. Okay, that has to go back. That. Okay. So I invite you all to sit comfortably, put down anything in your hands, pen, computer, give a little space between you and the table. Allow your feet to be planted flat on the floor if that's comfortable, to root yourself, the ground rooted to Mother Earth. And if you're comfortable, gently close your eyes. If not, look, softly gaze at a wall in front of you. And your only job in this meditation is to hear the sounds and feel the vibration and sensation in your body. And if you feel inclined, you can join, as Master Sen says, Tattvamasi. Otherwise, you can listen silently. You can say it in your mind, say it with your voice, and it's a 5-minute meditation.
I think we're only going to be able to do a couple minutes. We only have 5 minutes. We started late, so we're just cutting it off. Yeah, I think so. So we can't go longer because we need the rest to start. That'll push everything else longer and everybody that's going to be presenting. Right.
has she. And just invite you, with your eyes remaining closed, just take one more breath into your belly. Just take note of how you feel, any sensations or feelings in your body. And gently wiggle your fingers and toes, and gently open your eyelids to come back to our room. This is a chant to feel your eternity and infinity.
Just, can you go back to the one more? In our turned up. In our chapter, we also talk about spiritual assessments and interventions and how can we ethically bring spirituality into those. Also to reflect on how spirituality actually might be implicit in some of the interventions that we use, and how is that ethical if we're not being transparent. And to making sure that what we are using in terms of assessments and interventions, that they are congruent with the person's spiritual worldview. And there's many different spiritual assessments in the literature. There's the FICA model, the ESOP model, the CSI memo model, the HOPE model, the SPIRIT model. I have come up with this I-ACT model, which I have sort of tried to make it more focused on more broad spirituality and for social work, but I think it could apply to others as well. And then the other thing we talk about is how the trauma and spirituality intersect, and we have questions that we can ask about that for people to and for ourselves. And then the last part of our model is around transcendence, and that's spiritual intelligence and spiritual growth. And we talk about how we can move ourselves in that direction, but we can also support people we're working with to transcend adversity. And then lastly, in the model, is our vision is that we will create spiritual influencers, people who will go out and challenge systems, challenge policies, procedures, look at treatment modalities, making sure that we are supporting people in an ethical way and supporting the spiritual dimension of care and being advocates. So the more knowledge, the more we can change.
So we only have a few minutes, but we just wanted to open it up to ask about what your thoughts are about this model. How might your pedagogical approach or practice be changed or influenced by this model?
Thank you. I'll just introduce myself because I didn't do it this morning. For the people online as well, it's Eileen Margolin. I actually really like this presentation. In the last while I was preparing my presentation, one of the things that had come up for me, and also in regards to a lot of the younger generation, having literature and information available to help the younger population understand spirituality. And I think this model that you ladies created is a great way. I think this is something that would be really great to see within the school system in a curriculum, just as the basic information and getting the youth interested in this area. But definitely, I think this model there's a lot of reflection in it, a lot of, kind of the questions that you ladies posed. But I definitely think I see something like this in the school system.
Thank you so much, Mona. Any other? Yes.
I have a question would just around something I'm grappling with in my own research. So my background was as a social service worker for 10 years in Toronto, doing grief and loss with frontline harm reduction workers in the context of the overdose crisis. And I left social work to go to divinity school because I couldn't continue doing that work in a secular context. And I now train social workers in spiritual approaches to grief care. But something I'm wondering is, so for you who are, thinking about social work pedagogy, within seminary, we think about our calls to doing spiritual care as rooted in our ethics of like a spiritual imperative. Like it's so deeply embedded in what we believe in our spiritual lives to be the way you live a good life, to care for people, right? I should say the seminary I go to at U of T is also like very progressive and rooted in like Latinx liberation theology. So we're talking a lot about like what it means to care for people. And so my question to you is, when you're working with or training social workers who are coming from a secular context, how do you frame or get them to locate what is so deeply important about what they're called to do? Does that make sense as a question? Yeah.
Yeah,
it's why I say I'm grappling with it right now.
It's an amazing question, though. Can I still speak here and still be seen online?
I don't know if you can be seen.
Okay. So thank you for that really important question. So I'll start, and then I'm sure Heather has something to say too. What I would say is that it really comes back to definition of spirituality. That's why I really love to start with what spirituality is in its etymology, and it comes back to growth through spiral movement and breath. And that is such an inclusive definition. And as you saw the slide that Heather did around religion and spirituality overlapping, it's really important that we can all come together under a spiritual worldview and maintain each of our own paths. Someone can maintain their own religious belief, their own spiritual upbringing, whatever. They can adopt another spiritual path. That's entirely up to them. But the inclusive nature of spirituality is someone can still even be an atheist, and because they can root themselves in their own deep meaning-making system, their own values of truth and liberation and freedom. So that's one answer that I would say. And also the Mahavakya meditation is rooted in spirituality as creative beings. So we are creators at our core. So tuning into that creative power goes beneath all of the pains and coming back to that center.
And I would say one of the things I ask many of the students in class is, what brought you to social work, right? And inevitably people say, because I want to help others. I want to serve others. It's part of my spirituality. It's part of my religion to do these things. So it is deeply rooted in why they're coming to social work quite often. So we need to also then say, okay, it's deeply rooted in that. It's also rooted in the profession of spirituality, of social work. Spirituality's roots come from Christian values, right? Thankfully, many of those values are very common across religions. But we have to think about that too. Where are the tensions? Where are the things that are going to be struggles, right? Where are the points? We have to have those conversations, and we have to talk about how is my own spirituality going to be a support, and how can I bring it in a good way? But then also where might I need to be super reflective? Where might I need to check and balance myself? Where might I need support? Where might I need to get some clinical supervision? These are all really critical pieces that I think are part of that whole practice identity formation.
Yeah, thank you for those questions and comments, really important. And again, we're very happy to make our slides available. We'll figure out how to do that.
Yeah, and actually there's a chapter with this model that's open access. We can also provide you with that. And we also have a chapter in Lee Tefford's and Ariel Dillon's Trauma-Informed Pedagogy book. So we have our spiritual pedagogy chapter in that as well.
And we are, in the next few years, Heather and I are also going to be working on a practice text that really brings spirituality into the heart of helping professions practice. So look out for that.
And we are going to look at creating an institute, a transdisciplinary institute for spirituality with research practice and pedagogy.
Yes, that we will invite you all to be a part of. So thank you so much and for listening to us and being with us.
I don't know if there's any questions or comments online, but feel free to reach out to us at any time.
Did we check with online? Okay, perfect. Thank you.